Well, that's been an absolutely fascinating series of explanations of the slides, David. I'd like to draw our evening to a close with this observation from the Auckland scene in terms of experience, spirituality, religion, and the science interface. We had an experience with a family in the church, and the mother and father are very happy for this to be public and have been so for quite some time. They had a very beautiful young daughter, a young woman who died of cancer, and I was the Methodist presbyter or minister at the time. A number of months after, the mother and father, Weaking and Anne, asked me to go and listen to a phenomenon. And I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I went to their home, and they took me into a particular location in the home, and they said at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if you stand in this spot, you will hear a series of very similar to chimes, Chinese chimes, as if in the distance. And they explained that this phenomenon had started when in fact they had returned to Malaysia to visit relatives' funeral. And the first time that Weaking heard it was in an elevator. And this set of chimes, which is very, very faint, had followed them round into different locations throughout Malaysia and back into their own home here in Auckland. Because I was following these kinds of phenomenon through the scientific and medical network, particularly back in the 90s and early 2000s, there were odd little snippets that would appear in the magazines of similar kinds of experience. They're not in the category of apparition. We weren't seeing things, but I listened and I heard exactly what they were describing. There were 21 chimes. It was a beautiful effect, but it was faint. And if you moved out of the particular location, you no longer heard it. Okay. With their permission, I then asked Dr. Leo Hobbes. I don't know whether you recall Leo, but he was a nuclear physicist, instrumental in setting up the Auckland group. And I asked a fellow Methodist minister, presbyter, to come with me, and Weaking and Anne were perfectly happy. They'd shared the experience with a number of friends. So we all went back a little bit later, and we listened. Now, my Methodist colleague, Reverend Cedric Hay, also heard this inexplicable sound. It was a very beautiful, very distant chiming, and it was always 21 times. And the Lee family noted that over the course of months, that the intensity of the sound, the level of the sound, had been declining steadily. And in fact, it turned out that they continued to hear the chimes for, I think, about another year, but progressively getting further and further away until no longer audible. So my colleague, the Reverend Cedric Hay, heard the chimes. Leo did not. But Leo had brought, wait for it, a portable tape recorder. And we said, well, Leo, have the tape going. And he put the recorder, held it up like that to listen to the chimes. Leo was convinced that we had all heard something. There was no question that we were adamant that we'd heard things. He hadn't. And in fact, when he had the tape analysed by another person that was loosely associated with the local SMN, the group, who was an audio engineer, this person was able to amplify and actually bring up on the tape the chimes. And Leo heard it. And he was as astonished as anyone, because he had assumed that though our experience was genuine, it was not recordable.
Yes,
And,
quite, absolutely.
so we agreed that at that time there were huge numbers of pastoral sensitivities. It was a very raw experience, but Weeking and Anne were only too willing to share what they had heard, and we also heard. Since then, I've spent years trying to think of an explanation. And just prior to having this online meeting, a few weeks ago, I asked Leo about where the tape was because I would love to have been able to have played it. Uh,
Oh, yes.
Unfortunately, they had been through a number of house shifts and he was no longer able to locate it. And he does apologise. He's now in his 90th year and he sends his apologies for not being able to come online to talk to you
To
tonight.
pay greetings. Yeah, indeed.
But uh, he heard his own tape recording of it, and that changed everything. And I'm just telling that story because I think it's the kind of experiential thing. Of course, it's completely subjective. And of course, it's completely objective in that eventually all of us who went to hear it heard it, as did a number of the Lee family friends and acquaintances. So, but it's taken a long time, not just because of the pastoral sensitivity issues, but also because of the potential for embarrassment of talking about we heard. It's not a voice, it was a very distinctive set of chimes, uh, as, as if on a wind, is the only way I can describe
Yes.
it. And yet it is the most vivid, real, spiritual experience because I cannot fit it into my theological religious framework except to call it something of a mystery of the grace of God. Because there was feeling on the part of the family, and certainly for myself and my Methodist colleague, that what we had experienced was, in some sense, a significant sign to say that all was well, but not all was explainable, explicable.
Yes.
Any comments?
Yes. Well, first of all, is there any significance, in relation to Christine and to chimes? I mean, is that anything? Is there any connection between her and chimes?
The she was a very skilled young pianist, but
Okay.
that's the only musical connection I
There's
could
a
think.
there's a musical thing. And then how did you say she was 21
She was in
when
her
she
early
died?
20s. I think she might have been 22 or possibly a little bit older when she eventually died. Yes.
Now, I just wondered that whether there's any significance between in the number of times the chimes were heard and the age at which she died.
No, I don't think so. I spend a lot of time thinking about the number 21 and various symbolic interpretations that have been given to that. It is in Chinese literature, it's, if I remember correctly, it's a very hallowed number. Um,
Ah, okay,
but yeah, that's about as far as
interesting.
I've been able to get into it.
The other more broad remark would be that that there's a whole field called after death communications, which is not necessarily um, apparitions and sort of classic things, but other senses are involved as well. So that, for instance, you would get somebody who loved roses, for instance, and they after they died, a smell of roses would come into the house, and so there are many different modalities for communicating um, and reassuring those who are still here that you're okay, because that's the fundamental message of all these after death communications is for the deceased to reassure those still alive in the physical that they're okay. And once they feel they've got the message through, they can move on. They don't need to hang around. And I think the distancing, the was what that you talked about, the fact that they got more faint, might be indicative of the fact that she was moving on, if this is a phenomenon associated with her, which it would seem quite probable that it was.
Well, look, thank you very much for that, particularly, but thank you very much in general, David, for making your time available to talk.
Okay, thanks and greetings to all of you, and have a good rest of your evening.